By now, most of you have heard of PalWorld. It's a game that uses strikingly similar creature designs to that of Pokemon, but has mechanics more like Monster Hunter or Rust. As I record this, PalWorld is still on Steam and the Microsoft Store for the time being. Aside from drawing the attention of litigious Nintendo and having other controversies like the use of AI to generate character designs, the game has been selling well and polarizing the opinions of gamers around the world. What I would like to talk about is the reason why PalWorld has done so well. It's not just because PalWorld is borrowing successful ideas, but because the developers are doing things that Game Freak and Nintendo have failed to do. Nintendo has been fighting with fan-made Pokemon content for a long time. Fans have put Pokemon in VR, made Pokemon survival games, added Pokemon to other games, converted Pokemon into an MMO, and so on. Game Freak and Nintendo have fallen into a sequel trap. They were afraid to do anything new with Pokemon, for fear of alienating their original audience. Their glacial pace in adding new features and designs is an intentional choice because the alternative is risky. Fans, on the other hand, know what they want. So, fans keep developing games that are closer to the demand than what Nintendo is willing to risk developing. A quick look at the most sold games of all time shows that Pokemon has a lot of competition. The list is dominated by multiplayer games and multi-platform games. At the top of the list is Minecraft with over 300 million sales. A lot of the games that are above Pokemon on this list are open-world 3D games, although there are notable exceptions like Tetris. A similar peek at Steam's active player counts shows PalWorld as the most active game right now, with the rest of the list being dominated by shooters. Dota 2 and Baldur's Gate 3 are notable outliers. PalWorld essentially combines all of these aspects. It's an open-world game with survival and building elements, with multiplayer gameplay. It uses familiar construction and shooting mechanics players know from popular genres. It hews closer to the style of game that players currently show demand for. Nintendo famously sells their own consoles and produces their own exclusive games for those consoles. In theory, doing so serves as a way to discourage piracy and get some cross-promotion when players buy more games for the same console. However, that theory has been stretched to its limit and beyond. As I've been saying since about 2011, game consoles have to compete with lots of devices that aren't traditionally associated with gaming, like phones and tablets. Nintendo wants to focus on a target audience that is too young to own a smartphone. I don't have to tell you that in 2024 that audience is disappearing. In reality, Nintendo's main audience is not just children who don't have other devices, but also teens and adults who probably have other devices. There's a reason why Pokemon Go was so successful, and it wasn't just because of the free-to-play model. It was because the game briefly connected with a wellspring of pent-up demand among Nintendo expats who don't buy Nintendo consoles anymore. The Nintendo Switch is an excellent example of why Nintendo's console strategy is broken. Nintendo reuses existing Nvidia chips, developed around 2015, to run their current handhelds. They are ARM-based handhelds with existing decompilers and homebrew software for them, just waiting to be hacked. Plus, the performance of those old chips was basically obsolete before Nintendo started using them. Smartphones have had faster processors for the last decade, and most have more RAM than a Switch now as well. This is to say nothing of PCs. When Zelda Tears of the Kingdom was just about to release in the US, there was a leak, and players got it to work on homebrew emulators quickly. It ended up being playable on PCs with graphical upgrades superior to the original game before players could buy it officially. Other companies like Sony have seen the writing on the wall and regularly port and resell their formerly console-exclusive games for PCs. Game streaming services like Microsoft's and Sony's also seek to market games to players who can't or won't play them on their original consoles. Sega not only doesn't build consoles anymore, but targets phones, tablets, and PCs primarily. They've effectively moved on from the console market. Nintendo is essentially the last bastion of permanent console exclusivity. While I fully expect for PalWorld's controversies to kill it sooner or later, I hope Nintendo will take this as a teachable moment about the state of the gaming industry. I remember the old Pokemon games fondly, and I would probably still play them if I wasn't one of those people locked out by console exclusivity. But the rest of the market has largely moved on. One could argue that Nintendo's exclusivity, that may have boosted sales in the short term, ultimately nerfed their influence on the gaming industry as a whole. That left a void, a niche for PalWorld to fill. All this begs a question. If Nintendo has left such a void, what should they be doing differently? In my personal opinion, Nintendo should probably attempt to develop a survival game that would be considered the more sanitized, brand-appropriate version of PalWorld. I wouldn't put it past them to try a battle royale with Pokemon avatars as well, provided that it focuses on Pokemon's elemental mechanics rather than weapons. Most importantly, Nintendo needs to bring the mainstream games they typically release on their consoles to other markets like Steam. I think Nintendo needs to transition from consoles to a more multi-platform approach, analogous to Sega's or Sony's. It pains me to say it, because Game Boy was part of my childhood, like it was in many of yours, but Nintendo probably loses more sales with exclusivity than they gain, so the economics of their strategy don't really work anymore in 2024. The solution for Nintendo is simple. In the short term, release game ports on a delayed schedule, and produce some games that are PC exclusive so you aren't trapping your most valuable IPs on a dying platform. When the Switch ultimately sunsets, Nintendo should focus on supporting a glut of existing platforms and perhaps move into the accessory business. Imagine a future in which the next Nintendo console isn't a whole console, but a controller that pairs to your PC or tablet, and a Nintendo software platform. The machine would be inexpensive, the experience would be consistent for lots of players, and Nintendo could still upsell the same users they were trying to target with past consoles. Unburdened of their sunk cost, Nintendo could do things that would never have worked on their own hardware. Anyway, those are my 2 cents on the matter. There are some links in the description below to other videos about fan-made Pokemon games and the specs of the Nintendo Switch. For the tiny fraction of you who haven't actually heard of PalWorld, I'll make sure to link some of that gameplay as well. If you actually want to try a fan-made Pokemon game, I'll leave a couple of links to those below. Just keep in mind that I don't endorse them or guarantee that their software is safe, so use your best judgment.